So today I'm joined by a remarkable voice at the intersection of science, of sustainability, and themes around agriculture. Dr. Ndeke Musee is joining me in studio. His work, essentially, I was thinking of a way to kind of condense it because he's done so much over the decades. But his work challenges us to essentially rethink agriculture, not just as an industry, but as a living system, one that depends entirely on nature to thrive, if you really think about it. So in this time where food security is one of Africa's greatest concerns, he is inviting you, especially in this conversation, but essentially through his work, he is inviting you to ask powerful questions, one of them being, what if the answer we already have is beneath our feet? You know, if you really think about it. So a pleasure to have Dr. Musee join me in studio on Planting the Seed. Thank you very much for joining me, Doc. So good to have you join me in person so we can have this fruitful conversation.
Thank you, Masheko. I thought this was not going to happen because when you mentioned it at first, I thought it was really a joke. And then all of a sudden, I get the invitation. Thank you so much for the invitation, and I welcome. I'm looking forward to have a conversation with you whereby I'm sure some questions will arise from your audience, and we can be able to have this conversation further, not just on the 22nd of March, 2026, but as a living aspect of asking ourselves, how are we going to be able to feed ourselves now and into the future? I think that is the existential question that we need to be able to deal with. And as we'll dive deep into the conversation, it will become clear why agriculture becomes pivotal in the way forward for Africa for now and into the future. Thank you for inviting us.
Oh, you are absolutely welcome. You also are going to be speaking to me in your capacity as Director of Planetary Boundaries, and we're going to unpack the work and the research that is involved there. But I know you very well, right? I know you very, very well. We've known each other for a while, and we've had several conversations that are not easy, but very, very important. But I don't want to hoard you now and keep you all to myself. I want to introduce you to our African listener who's tuning in and perhaps knowing about you and your work for the first time. Let's talk about what first drew you to the world of food systems and agriculture, and your research in themes around sustainability. What continues to inspire, how you view things and how you've researched over the years?
Let me start by introducing why we got into agriculture and why we founded the company called Beyond Gen Beta Solutions, which actually applies the planetary boundary framework.
Right.
Now, we got into agriculture for a very simple reason. One is that agriculture is one of the largest consumers of the natural resources. In other words, if you are coming from an economics perspective, you'll be talking of the environmental assets. And one of the largest consumers of that is agriculture. Why? Globally, you need to be able to feed 8.25 billion people by October last year. Two, in South Africa, you need to be feeding between 64 and 66 million people daily. Now, let's look at something interesting. Kellogg's, which is still part of our breakfast, our food stuff, did a research a couple of years ago, and I used that data, and I said, if we have got 65 million people in South Africa, how many meals, depending on who eats breakfast, lunch, and supper? Here is the number, and this needs to land. We are talking of 140 million meals daily. And that means that food has to be able to come from somewhere. It has to come from land. And for you to grow that food, you need a couple of things. And I'll mention them briefly. One, good climate to grow that food. Number two, you need adequate water. Number three, you need biodiversity, which has got integrity, because one of the largest contributors of our food growing is actually pollination as a provision from the environment.
That's right.
And lastly, you also need to be able to have healthy soil which can hold the water because it has got sufficient carbon. So given that, and you are supposed to produce 140 million meals, clearly agriculture becomes critical. Number two, for us to be able to grow and do what we do, we need nutrients sufficiency. In other words, we need to be able to have nutrients that will be able to make us to grow from our childhood until the last day that we are here in this world. So where do we get that? Food. So that food must be having sufficient nutrients so that it can be able to meet that particular function in our bodies. And lastly, there must be food security. There should be enough food. Let me highlight this, Maseko, before I give it back to you. Today, as we hold this discussion, there are four intersecting problems or challenges global. One, energy crisis, Strait of Hormuz closed. That triggers economic crisis. And that economic crisis, there is no way it's going to be able to stop there without triggering financial crisis. And lastly, there will be food crisis. Why? Because much of our fertilizers, they come from that region. And as you can see, there are quite a couple of bombings in terms of plants, both for petrol production or for crude production, for gas as well as for fertilizers. Right. And therefore, as we have this conversation today, it comes at a time when the world is really at a pivotal juncture where decisions has to be made and made quickly. And one of them is that there could be anger if we cannot be able to get our fertilizers. And that will become clear as we have this conversation. Thank you.
Okay. You've moved us into almost like a master class, on food production and the science of producing food, which is so important. We forget that often, especially as people that are new into the field. In studio with me is a researcher and scientist for many years, and founder and director of Beyond Gen Beta Solutions. Of course, this then informs the framework of planetary boundaries, as he noted rightfully. We're going to talk about that and so much more when we return. Have a notebook, just have a notebook and a pen next to you, because really a masterclass is coming through with Dr. Ndeke Musee, who joins me in his capacity as the founder and director of Beyond Gen Beta Solutions. He holds a doctorate in chemical engineering. Chemical engineering sciences from the Stellenbosch University in the Cape Town, in the Western Cape province, I want to say. And he's developed wonderful, sort of frameworks around agricultural planetary boundaries. And the audit framework is what he's also going to explain to you and I. So, let's talk about all these wonderful credentials, because, obviously, and very, very critical, is it's very easy for us to, and that's the stuff that I love, talking about the ecology of the work, the human capital, but there's also a rich and deep data-based framework that informs the head of agriculture, that informs the production intelligence, and science and research is at the top of all of that. So talk to us about just your studies and how they have informed your passions in the field.
Post high school, I joined a university where formerly was an agricultural college in Kenya.
Okay.
And so when I went in there, I went to do a Bachelor of Education, Maths and Physics. But when you are going to class, you are actually surrounded by food. We were passing through the dairy where they were making very beautiful yogurt at very good price, because it was in the university.
Stunning.
And we are next to wheat and pyrethrum and maize and beans. That is in the Rift Valley in Kenya. And so that triggered my interest in agriculture. Mm-hmm. But also, formerly, before I went to the university, where I came from, the parents were farmers. Actually, when I was very young, we were doing coffee. But now we can't do coffee anymore because of the climate change and water scarcity, biodiversity degradation. So agriculture actually started very long in my life. And then after undergraduate, as a teacher, taught for 4 years in Kenya. Then I got a funding from Germany. Well, I went to the University of Botswana. I did a master's in physics, theoretical physics of all things. Right. But when I finished the master's, I had a very good offer to go and do a PhD in physics. And then a question propped in my mind. I love environment. But I'm now going to the physics. And it will take me completely, because what I did for master's, part of it was actually atmospheric physics, was environmental physics.
Yeah.
And that's why I decided to go for a doctorate at the University of Stellenbosch. What did I do there? Waste management in the wine industry. I went back to agriculture itself to understand how to produce wine from the time the grapes get into the gate of the winery until you borrowed it up. So I was working actually with the farmers. I'll go there, I'll look at the harvesting of the grapes, the transportation of the grapes, the crushing of the grapes, the fermentation of the grape, the filtering of the wine, and bottling it up. And that was my part of the PhD. So I went back to agriculture.
Yes.
And there we go. That gave me a lot of interest in agriculture. Why? If you go to the wine industry, when actually they are really growing them, it's one of the beautiful fields you can ever find yourself in. And in South Africa, where we grow wine, is one of the rich biodiversity regions in the world. The Western Cape has got so many species of organisms. Is termed as one of the corridors rich with biodiversity in terms of species, plants, and all that. So that really grew me interest into the into agriculture and farming stuff. Then I went and started dealing with the waste in the developing decision support systems for chemicals and pollution and waste. But once I stopped the issue of the formal employment, I said, wait a minute, where's my passion? Back in agriculture. And that is why we developed the agricultural planetary boundary audit framework. Because now the skills that I already gained during my career in the CSR and in the academia, now I'm saying, wait a minute, what is the biggest challenge that we have in Africa today? It's food. The other time I asked one of the CEOs through the LinkedIn, and I asked, how will Africa rise when someone else feeds us? It cannot be. So agriculture is actually central to what is going to be able to take us into the future. You can't talk about technology when the children are hungry. You cannot talk about a well-schooling system when actually there is malnutrition. Yeah. There is no way you're going to be able to talk about energy security, financial security, economic security. All those aspects are offsprings of a well-fed population. And that has been demonstrated in all developed societies. There is no compelling case within the African context whereby this is going to be an exception. And therefore, that's why we're having great interest into the field of agriculture. And that is why we are going to be able to be working. I'm dedicating my life now to work with the farmers to understand the intersection of agriculture and the impact into the environment, and the impact of the environment into the agriculture, and find a passage, what we call a corridor of life. Let me repeat that again. A corridor of life. In other words, where we can produce our food in such a way that we meet food security, we meet nutrition sufficiency, we protect the ecology. Remember, all of us who are alive, including those who are listening to me, we are indebted to future generations for the same earth. Let me give you an example. Today, as I speak here, we have got 65 million South Africans. In 2050, we will be sitting with not less than 80 million South Africans. Now, last night I had an opportunity to look at the populations per countries. There are more than almost close to 20 countries in Africa with less than 15 million. In other words, we're going to be able to create a new nation in the next 25 years. So where are we going to get the food? We are not going to expand South Africa by 1 centimeter because that will be able to violate the boundaries. But already we are sitting with the challenges of what about diversity, climate change. And that is why when you apply the concept of the planetary boundary, it becomes critical. What is planetary boundaries? Somebody is saying, you're always talking about the planetary boundaries. Let me just zoom into it a bit. Please. Planetary boundaries is a scientific framework which defines the safe operating space for humanity to meet its needs now and into the future. You do not just look at it the way we normally look at the normal system, whereby we are talking of the carrying capacity. There are thresholds in which, if they are exceeded, you get irreversible impacts. I'll give you an example. If you have a borehole as a farmer, and you pump beyond the rate at which the water can be able to be replenished, what is going to happen with that borehole is that borehole will no longer be able to produce water. There will be two options. You either be able to dig a new borehole, and that must be farther from where you have already exhausted. And remember, you're not the only farmer there. Or the second is to be able to transport water, which is actually going to be very expensive. Therefore, when we talk about the planetary boundaries, we have to look at things like water.
Right.
When we generate carbon dioxide and put it into the air, we are already warming the earth. And yet, a warmer earth is not suitable for crop production. And therefore, we need to be able to look at how we farm to make sure that we are within the boundaries of what the climate can allow us to do. Thirdly, look at South Africa. And here is the number. Numbers are very, I like numbers because numbers, they tell a truth that...
And they don't lie.
Yes, then they don't lie. Here is the number. Do you know that the honeybees in South Africa, they are responsible for 10.3 billion rand a year for food production in South Africa? Our apricots, our avocados, our macadamia nuts, our bees, our Lucerne for the meat that we love, in terms of the silage for the cattle. In fact, in South Africa, we have around 50 crops that are dependent on pollination. In other words, when you take away the honeybees, those 50 crops, they are going to be able to suffer. And it is very expensive to have artificial pollination. It's highly, highly expensive. And therefore, protecting the biodiversity, which is one of the aspects in the planetary boundaries, becomes very critical. The other aspect, and the last one that I want to talk about, is actually pollution. Remember, in agriculture, we use a lot of fertilizers, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And particularly, phosphorus and nitrogen, they can be able to pollute highly our waterways. And therefore, the way you apply fertilizers must be the right quantities. You need to be able to understand the soils that you are really working with to make sure that the runoff is as minimal as possible. Remember, as a farmer, when you are going to have excessive nitrogen or phosphorus, that's also money you are losing, because the nutrients use efficiency is capped around 0.61, and therefore putting more into the soil does not really be able to increase your yield. The other last issue that we need to look at, it is the use of pesticides, pollution. Remember, if those who are going to be dependent, if your crops are dependent on the bees, the way you use your pesticides can also affect the health of the bees. And therefore, the planetary boundaries gives us 9 issues, but 6 of them are very critical to agriculture, the ones that I've already mentioned. And we need to be able to do that, because if we don't do that, and we exceed the limits, what is going to happen that you cannot be able to produce enough food? It means we have to depend from the food elsewhere. But here is the catch. As we speak today, on 22nd of March 2026, around 60 to 65 of remaining arable land across the globe is in Africa. And remember, as we speak today, 1.5 billion people are in Africa. By 2050, we will be having 2.5 billion Africans. What does that really mean? We are going to have an excess of 1 billion people in the next 25 years. And that land is the one that we need to be able to feed those people. Africa is not going to be able to increase. The fertility of the land has to be taken care of. The climate is already threatening. So we need to work within the planetary boundaries to make sure that we farm in a way that we work with the nature. And lastly, no generation, no society has ever worked against nature and won. Just as much that as we do agriculture, no society over history, of recorded history, that has ever worked in agricultural sector against nature and won. Thank you.
You've said, oh man, you know what? I really am. developing such a big respect for the work of the audit framework that is planetary boundaries, because it is, and I think what sits at the heart of how you think, even as an academic, but you work with practitioners, you work with the farmers over many years, you've done that. You are an advocate for regeneration. And how we treat the planet. Many articles that you've written, one of them that I read that you recommended for me, that you've written for Food for Mzansi, really exploring our relationship with agriculture, or rather agriculture's relationship with nature, is so important, because you've said in that article and in several other writings that agriculture is 100% dependent on nature. Right, and we need to, and I think that's such a profound statement, because what we are seeing is that there are, especially through modern farming, Doc, the modern farming system is reliant on these fertilizers that you're talking about. It's reliant on pesticides. It's reliant on controlling nature, which doesn't sound sustainable at this critical time. Chemicals, inputs, technology, it's a lot. It's a lot for the planet. So what changes? What changes can we start to make so that we can farm with nature instead of farming against it?
Let's start by asking a question. What is regenerative agriculture?
Give me your definition. I want to
hear. I think what we need is to give a practical explanation and give it in the context of agriculture that we have. Mm-hmm. When you talk about the regenerative agriculture, you're really not saying that you're going to remove all the aspects that we have. But we are saying that there's going to be a transformation from the current practices. You start working with nature. What does that really mean?
Yeah.
Ensure that you do not disturb the soil carbon. Why? Actually, this week in the Journal of Science, they published an article. What did they find? They found that when you actually disturb the soil, it is when you begin to see farms whereby when the soil has been seriously disturbed, rather than when it rains the water to be able to percolate into the soil, it floods. Why? The soil has got like capillaries, which allows the carbon to sit over there and absorb water. So you need to be able to take care of soil carbon, because that is going to be the reservoir of the water when it rains or when you irrigate. Number two, you need to be able to look after water. Excessive use of water, and that has already been seen in part of South Africa, for example, where we have got fruits in the Limpopo and Mpumalanga area. Practical. Mm-hmm. The farmers were over-irrigating. When drought came and there was a reduction in water, they got more from their fruits. Why? Because they are not watering them up. By the time they realized that we were actually spending millions of gallons of water and millions of rand to irrigate. Therefore, working with the agricultural extension officers and other professionals in agriculture, it is important to establish how the amount of water required for the crop that you are really growing. And lastly, you take care of the biodiversity. There is no way we are going to be able to destroy the biodiversity around agriculture and expect, for example, your pollination-dependent crops to be able to do well. And therefore, we need to be able to have that. And remember, if you travel in South Africa, in other countries in Africa, there is a lot of intercropping. Some crops will require pollination, others will not. But all in that ecosystem, or in that beautiful mosaic of farming, is where actually produces our food. And therefore, we need to be able to have those three aspects. And that is what you really, when you talk about regenerative agriculture. Reduce your fertilizers, optimize your water use, protect the biodiversity, ensure that your soil carbon is actually not disturbed, because that is what is going to be able to increase your yield per area. Thank you.
Yep, and that's what we have been doing on the African continent. We have been at the forefront of regeneration and regenerating the soil, and also, in conjunction with that, re-greening spaces. That's how we've always done. Planting the food with the, other plants that are able to pollinate, flowers and what have you. India has been at the forefront as well of this work. So in studio with Dr. Ndeke Musee, he is the founder and director of Beyond Gen Beta Solutions and has come up with a very critical audit framework, the agricultural planetary boundaries. Let's continue our conversation. I think for me, the planetary boundary framework, as it were, is so important, and I'd like us to kind of, perhaps break it down into bite sizes and make it practical, right? Because a lot of the work, as you've spoken in the last couple of minutes, is really about it sounds abstract, I want to say. So how do farmers then take that knowledge, take that data, because data is currency in agriculture as well? How do we look at that and incorporate it for farmers on the ground so that they can operate within these very limits that you're talking about, but not looking at it as a limitation, but as a way to respect the unpaid work that nature does for us on a daily?
Thank you very much for the question. I will start by looking at it, farming to be a business. And therefore, I will use the planetary boundaries as a tool that can be able to minimize, mitigate, help the farmers to adapt to the risks to their businesses, because that becomes critical. Number one of the aspects that you have at the moment is that there is a disruption of farming by climate change, by water scarcity, by depletion of the biodiversity. And the markets are beginning to demand that we need to be able to show that we are farming within nature.
Yeah.
And therefore, planetary boundaries is a practical tool that not only looks one aspect at a time, like water, like climate change, like biodiversity, like soil. It integrates all of them so that when you are looking at solutions, you look at which solutions will be able to meet a multiple of these challenges that you have to your farming as a business. Number two, both in national and international markets, national and international, even regional, there is increasing demand for traceability and validation of whether the farmers are farming within nature. Planetary boundaries, the way we have already designed it, can be able to give you that function, because you want to get into those premium market spaces for your crops or for your products, whether they are livestock or whether they are crops. And therefore, that becomes an aspect that is very critical. Thirdly, customers, those who buy the food, they are putting pressure on the retailers to say, I want to know where it comes from, and I want to understand whether it is really farmed in accordance to the limitations or the constraint that the nature imposes. And therefore, the retailers are going to be able to say, you know what, we need to understand the custody of the production of the food from the farm to the fork. In other words, what kind of pesticides did you use? How was the fertilizer was applied? How was water being used? How the soil has already been taken care of? Can I really trust to saying, for example, a multi-year contracts with you to get consistent farming because you're really taking and working within nature? And that is a practical aspect, because all of us in business, we are looking for premium markets. And farming as a business, you'll be able to have to use that data for that kind of a purpose. The other issue is that we are now entering, actually we have already entered into what we call Anthropocene epoch. Let me break it down.
Okay,
we have now we have now reached a point whereby it is no longer the environment that determines the season in which we are living. We are living at a season whereby the man controls, or humanity or humankind controls what exactly happens in the environment. That brings the concept of scarcity. What does scarcity do from an economics perspective? You expect steep competition for what? Natural resources, water, land. We have land issues across Africa. In fact, one of the interesting things, and I want to mention it here, is that we are finding literature, or we are finding news, or we are finding official documents to the extent that some of the African countries are actually selling land to foreign companies to grow food in Africa. And that tells you the issue of land scarcity. So we need to be able to integrate how we do the farming and how we take care of the land. Because if we are going to be able to not to protect the land as it is, and the 60 to 65% of the Africa's arable land, we will run into trouble. Not just food for us, but also as our obligation to humanity to provide that food to the rest of the world. And lastly, how do you make planetary boundaries really applicable?
Yes.
The biggest beneficiary of applying the planetary boundaries is actually the farmer. How? Farming, if you look at it, most of it is actually legacy. You want to pass it from one generation to another. So what kind of soils do you really want to be able to pass to the next generation? What is the quality of the land use change, in other words? What will be the kind of biodiversity that supports the farming activities that we are really undertaking? Will there be water resources for the next generation to be able to farm? If there's going to be exponential growth in terms of the carbon dioxide production and methane from our farms, what is going to happen when actually the temperatures are exceeding 1.5 degrees, as they are talking about in terms of Paris Climate Agreement? So when you look at all these aspects, it has got practicality, because planetary boundaries takes you away from the cascading to whereby there will be a catastrophe in terms of the farming, whereby we have exceeded our capability, we have exceeded the limits of water extraction, release of climate causing greenhouse gases into the environment, degrading the land, and actually destroying the ecosystem. And so that becomes critical. One last point. Phosphorus, according to scientific estimates, shows that we have got 5 to 450 tons left in the world. I saw the numbers and I said million tons.
Is that a bad thing? I don't know.
Well, the question now becomes, we have been dependent on phosphorus to produce our food.
Okay.
So if the alternatives are not really found, and planetary boundaries gives you to look at how you can be able to meet all these planetary issues at the same time, what is going to happen when actually we are going to have the exhaustion of that? And remember, there is a global shift from fossil fuels, which actually are linked with the fertilizer production. So all these aspects that are really happening should be able to prepare farmers to be able to have a transformation of how we farm and what kind of inputs we are going to be able to depend on. And I'm very glad that in this conversation we touched on regenerative agriculture, because that is where the future really, is going to be. And Africa having, and I want to emphasize this again, with the remaining largest arable land and the human population raising towards 9 billion by 2050 and 10 billion by 2100, there is no way the role of regenerative agriculture can be ignored at all. There could be some cost at the moment, but we are going to have a managed change rather than to have abrupt, catastrophic aspects because of the environment really saying, wait a minute, you already exceeded my limits. And I believe that kind of a move, which is really gaining traction in the farming sector, shows that they really understand how the future will look like given the constraints and also the solution that we have been able to cover in this particular broadcast. Thank you.
This is what real transformation sounds like. And I think what you've been able to do in our conversation and through your work over the years, especially at this critical time, the panels that you've sat on, the articles that you've written, the research that you've embarked on through the Planetary Boundary Audit Framework, is you've been able to bridge R&R, research and reality, as I call it. So that's very important. If you're going to be farming, if you're going to be embarking on anything within the agricultural value chain, research is your friend, and you need to find out how you can incorporate that into reality. If we want to work with you, just very briefly, I think we've got like 10 seconds. How do we work with you? How do we work with your framework and perhaps collaborate with it so that we can get better yields, etc.?
We have a website. You can just Google Beyond Gen Beta Solutions. You get our website. Our contacts are there, and we can be able to reach out to us. There is an email, there is a telephone, and we have provided adequate information in our website, which we launched this Monday, so that we can be able to reach out to farmers. The last point I emphasize is this. The planetary boundaries concept is already becoming a legislative aspect in Europe, and there will be a demand
Wonderful.
to demonstrate for farmers outside Europe that they are farming within nature, within the planetary boundaries. So if we start preparing now, as that law comes to kick in either 2028 or 2029, we will have the runway to run and be able to fly out seamlessly and meet also the demand in the international market, because it also supports our agricultural industry. So thank you very much, and I believe once you reach out to us, we'll be able to get back to you, and we can see how we can be able to work together. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Did you hear that? How we can be able to work together. That is the fundamental key. Dr. Ndeke Musee, thank you very much. I think this was part one. You've got to come back. There's other things that we've got to see when we look at the lay of the land. But thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Dr. Ndeke Musee, founder and director of Beyond Gen Beta. Okay, if you type Beyond GENBETA on your Google, the website should be able to pop up, and you can just have a look at the work, have a look at this framework and what it means for you practically.